Welcome to the Ultimate Sacrifice Show, where combat veterans and Gold Star families have a voice. All right, welcome to the next episode of the Ultimate Sacrifice Show. Today we have an amazing guest coming on, Ryan Griffis. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on, man.
I really appreciate it. I am super excited for this. I know we've kind of been talking and trying to set a date, but we finally got it. It's here, so I'm super pumped for it.
Likewise, absolutely. So for anyone who does not know Ryan Griffis, aka Mr. Griffis, he is an active Army captain. He's an engineer, and he's a social media influencer and a motivator. And he's motivated me more than several times since I've met you. So on TikTok, I want to get this correct, so I'm gonna look at my notepad. On TikTok, he has 1.4 million subscribers, just hit it. Instagram, he has 15,000. In YouTube, he just hit 2,000. And that is just going to keep growing and growing and growing. I can imagine that not only within the service member and the military community, but outside of it in the veteran community and the Gold Star family community and all of us, you're going to explode because you have some really valuable content. And the awesome part about Ryan, what really caught my eye, is that his content is not an hour long. It's not like doing a show like this, for example. His content is 10, 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds tops, and then he's off. But it is super motivating. And it's quite frankly things that a lot of us need to hear and we yearn to hear. So I really appreciate you coming on. You know, you are a service member. You are the second service member we've had on the show. So we like to mix it up and make it a little different than if we're talking to a veteran or a Gold Star family member, or even an author. We had Sebastian Younger on too, which was cool. But I want to start with where you're from, your upbringing, if you played sports, your hobbies, and then what ultimately led you in to serve our country.
Yeah, so starting it off, my name is Ryan Griffis. I am from a very small town located in Macquarie County, Kentucky. It's on the eastern side of Kentucky. I grew up very poor. My parents actually got a divorce and split when I was 15 years old. A lot of childhood trauma throughout my upbringing, but it really made me appreciate life as I got older, through high school, starting in middle school. When they split, I was a trouble kid, always getting into fights, always being mischievous, getting into a lot of trouble, which led into high school. I already had a bad rep for my last name. The second day of high school, I ended up getting in a fight. So it already kind of paved the way on, I guess, who I was, to all the teachers and all the staff. By my senior year or my junior year, I turned a complete 180. I started getting recognized from colleges on leadership positions throughout ROTC. I ended up doing 4 electives. I was upping in my classes to kind of get me back on track. I ended up playing football. I done cross country and I wrestled as well, just to keep me active. But by my senior year, I was the class president, and I was a battalion commander in JROTC, which led the colonel from Eastern Kentucky. They done an article on me that I was teaching these classes because on my senior year, all the instructors, they either retired or quit, So it was myself and a substitute teacher, and they were going to do away with the program. So I wrote a letter to the Board of Education expressing why I think that the program should stay, because I was definitely in that troubled position as a kid. And that program actually turned it around for me, where I started appreciating the stuff that I had went through, being in leadership positions, being able to teach others other stuff that I had taught through or that I had learned throughout the last couple of years. And it got approved, and the program stayed, and they ended up getting more instructors. And I ended up getting a scholarship to Eastern Kentucky University 2 weeks out from graduating high school. He came down there and observed me doing 4 out of the 6 classes throughout the day. I showed up for a PT test. I actually denied the scholarship at first because I had no intentions on ever going to college. And then he called me 2 or 3 days prior before the PT test, showed up, done a PT test, passed, and then ended up getting a scholarship. And that's really paved the way for my life. I went off to college, got out of that small town, really started appreciating stuff a lot more, and I haven't looked back since.
That's incredible. That is awesome. So where did you grow up? What town in Kentucky?
Macquarie County, Kentucky. It's really on the Kentucky and Tennessee line.
There you
It's
go.
close to Oneida, Tennessee.
Nice. So I was down in Kentucky not too long ago. We did a little disaster relief campaign down there. It was probably the end of December leading into January, whenever those tornadoes tore through. And I went past Western Kentucky. How far is
Mhm.
Eastern Kentucky from Western?
So it's about 2 hours.
Okay,
Western was kind of like our rival, but
I'm sure.
it's about 2.5 hours.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, I think the culminating question is what led you into influencing? So it's one thing to be a social media influencer and a motivator from the outside looking in, kind of like a Jocko Willink. He got
Right.
out and people gravitate towards him left and right, but he wasn't necessarily like that in the service. It's really interesting and it's compelling to listen to someone like you because you do don the uniform still. And
Mhm.
especially for a lot of us veterans, we're like, wow, if we could have been surrounded by it's a noble mind and just someone who's wise beyond his years when we were in, that would have helped us immensely. So the floor is yours. I'm gonna let you answer it as long as you want, but what led you into influencing?
I get that question a lot, especially receiving messages that I have. And I would say probably anywhere between 25 and 50,000 messages, just from soldiers in general, like, man, I wish you were my commander. I wish you were in our leadership change. And I really sat down and I have to question, like, what am I doing different that a lot of leaders aren't? And I think it's just me realizing that outside of the uniform and inside of the uniform, I'm the same person. Although I'm professional at times, I'm also really understanding as well. And I kind of led that through my PL time and my XO time, is I'm just more or less of a people person. And although I do have rank, I don't use the rank for an advantage. If somebody's struggling, if somebody's going through stuff, I'm very understanding and I try to work with you in the best of my ability. I still hold that standard where I'm a competent leader and can make those tough decisions, but I'm really an understanding individual that and I think that is the way I was raised in my upbringing. You know, but I think in the military in general, we forget that as leaders, like, hey, these soldiers are still humans, at the end of the day, and we expect a lot out of them, but we can't get to the point where we don't understand that at the end of the day that they're just humans. And that's kind of how I lead from the front, is just understanding that everybody goes through something, everybody has a situation, everybody has a story, and you might not know that story. There's a lot of times where a lot of people can put on a fake smile, and you really don't know that individual. So as for me, when I meet somebody or I'm leading soldiers, I really try to invest and let that individual know that I understand them, I care for them, and I'm there for them if they need. Like, I have so many stories from soldiers that I invested in throughout my PL and XO time that had been in the service for 5 and 10 years. They were just like, man, I don't think anybody's ever asked me what my wife's name was, my kid's name, seeing what we're doing outside of the military, and that's something that's so simple that you can do as a leader in the military. Is just invest in the people that you're surrounded by, especially the people that you lead. So that, I think that's a big thing for me, why I wanted to become an influencer, is because after I went through certain situations throughout the military, especially the deployment, and seen it firsthand on how people can actually struggle and go through those situations and not have nobody there for them. I was that individual, like, I came back as a leader and I was struggling, and I felt like I didn't have anybody to talk to that I could relate to, because the leadership that I had, I just felt like it wasn't a comparison where we could be on that level, like just talking to me as a human, or as a normal person. I felt like it always had to be a structural leadership type conversation where I was kind of like tiptoeing around what I could say and what I couldn't. And all those there's a lot of regulations and stuff that is kind of like put on the back burner. I think there's a lot of conversations that we can have with soldiers and different individuals in the military that is just being relatable. So
Yeah.
really, I started that platform, my TikTok, at the end of 2020, and I was not really making the content that I do now. It was just kind of making some videos, and I really wasn't invested in it. It was just kind of, I mean, it was fun, but it really wasn't something that I desired to do. it wasn't until one of my videos really took off where I just was completely honest, and I was outside of uniform, and I was just letting anybody that would listen or see the video that I was struggling. I was having a hard time, and the messages that I received from that, from people that was in the service and outside of the service, was just incredible. And nobody really knew that I was in the service, especially as a leader, as a captain, for the
Yeah.
first while. And then when I came out and I was in uniform and they seen that I was a captain, everybody was like starstruck, like, oh wow, like this captain is on here.
Yeah.
He's struggling, he's leading. It was like a culture shock. I had colonels messaging me, sergeant majors messaging me, like really pushing what I was doing. Like they had followed me for a long time, but nobody really knew that I was in the service. So once they found out that I was a leader, a captain, it was very shocking for a lot of people. And I've gained a lot of traction since then.
I'm
A
sure.
million followers, like just supporting me. I really appreciate what I'm doing, and it's incredible for me to just go through the messages of the soldiers that can relate, or I've been able to help, or just even be an ear to listen to. So that, I think that's why I started it, because that one video I had such a great response. So now it's like a goal of mine. I don't have to be just a leader that isn't, um, I guess, understanding. I can be on here, I can be honest, and I'm not doing nothing wrong by doing that.
No, no, you're a beacon of light, like we've spoken about many a times, and there is nothing wrong with that. But I think that you bring up some really substantial points and some points we need to hit on. I remember when I first took a leadership role in the military, and let's rewind. So back in like the '07 era when I went in,
Mhm.
um, you're still used to the kind of old school mentality of you scream until you get the job done. So I remember when I
Sure.
took over a leadership role, it's my first leadership role, and you don't really know how to act. And of course you have buddies around you that you come up with them in the military, whether that be your PL time and then you make captain before them, or whether that be your NCO time, or your, let's say, your lower enlisted time and then you hit
Mhm.
NCO ranks and your buddies are still specialists or something like that. But I didn't know really what the right approach was. And I remember I tried to be like the hard charger, and then I tried to back off, and then I tried and I was trying to find the right balance. But ultimately I remember, a few years into that time and then another deployment later, you start to get seasoned and you start to see these different avenues and the things that make your soldiers tick. But what I'm
Mhm.
really getting at is, you mentioned the care that you really truly do have for your soldiers, and you can keep it professional, but if you see someone struggling, you can be that beacon for them. And I think a lot of people lose sight of that. Rank is not a person. Uh, I remember distinctly a few times where I was sitting back and we were out training. I think we were doing like close quarters combat at the time. I took over the scout platoon. Um, And I remember it was the only time I never heard anyone yell on the line in the infantry. I never heard anyone yell. And it kind of brings me back to the line I heard someone say, and I don't want to butcher this, but if you have to ask who is in charge, then you're not in charge.
Right.
And it's 100% true. And that was the first time that, yeah, everyone knows who's in charge. You don't need to bark down anyone. And what's funny about that is that's the first time, not the first time, but that is one of the few times that I saw something that was able to run so efficiently from soldiers because they weren't nervous about someone screaming down their throat
Mhm.
in my almost decade long career in the military. It was very interesting. So I think that approach is something that needs to be more widespread. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, there's times that call for different approaches, but there's
Right.
not many.
Right.
If you are an efficient leader and you truly know how to lead people, and certainly you do. But I don't think that is a far-fetched statement when people come up to you and say, "Hey, no, I wish I had you as a commander. I wish I had you as a PL. I wish I had you as this, that, and the other." Because it is true, man. A lot of people yearn for that, and our soldiers just went through 2+ decades of some of the most tumultuous combat we've ever seen in our lives.
Right.
And service members have to remember that too.
Mhm. No, I completely agree. I always kind of use that as well. If I'm having to use my rank to my advantage to get people to follow me, then I'm probably not doing the right thing. And like you said, there's definitely certain times where it is a different situation. But I came in hot and heavy during my PL time where I'm very competitive, and I came in with the drive like, hey, I'm going to shape this platoon and those individuals that were in it, whether they enjoyed it or not. I would think that they did afterwards, because I talked to, honestly, I still stay in contact with almost all of them. And from the first day when I started to how I seen the atmosphere of the platoon before I had it, until after, I would guarantee like all those soldiers, and just being transparent, like, I enjoyed it, they enjoyed it, and I would go into combat with those dudes any day and not expect anything less from them than just to follow. I had their trust, they had mine, and it was just a cool environment. And I never did have to use that aspect where I'm yelling and having to use my rank like, hey, I'm the lieutenant, I'm the PL, I'm the commander, you guys have to listen to me, because I was always in that mindset. If I'm having to do that, then I'm probably doing something wrong.
Yeah, or you have really terrible NCOs.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think I've maybe ran into that once. I've seen a
Mhm.
PL try to do that, but it didn't end well for him.
Right.
And it wouldn't end well for the platoon sergeant if they had to do that either.
Yeah.
But I think 9 times out of 10, you're 100% correct. And we have a very efficient military, luckily.
Yeah.
We have the best military in the world, thank God. But it's because of people like you. So that's greatly appreciated. I want to kind of go into that deployment you were talking about.
Mhm.
We've talked offline
Right.
about a lot of this. What I want to do is kind of pull out the, lessons learned, or the fact that,
Mhm.
yeah, hey, you were open about struggling when you came back. Because I
Right.
remember you come back, you get off the bus or the bird, and you walk into the hangar area, and then there's all of these, I don't know what they call them now. They're like social workers, essentially. And
Mhm.
they try
Yeah.
to pull you into these rooms and talk to you. Did anything happen? And 10
Right.
times out of 10, we lie to them and say, nope, nothing
Yeah.
happened. We're totally fine, because we
Yeah.
just don't want to be
Absolutely.
trapped in a room.
Right.
But I want you to elaborate on that, man, since you're pretty open about that. And, it took me a very long time. I've been out for 6.5 years, but you're
Mhm.
still in. And I find it compelling. And you're a leader, you're a captain. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, so for the deployment, it was exactly how you explained it. Like, as you come back, it is a weird scenario because you're in this mindset in like a survival mode. You've been gone, whether it's 6, 9, 12 months at the time, and the only thing you really know is like that survival mode mindset. Whether you see anything or whether you don't, you're still away from family. You are in a manifested mindset where you're like, hey, this is what I got to do. I have a task and purpose. I got a mission. Everything that you're doing is for a purpose. So when you come back and you get off that bird or you're in the hangar, you have all these individuals coming up to you and kind of talking to you personal, and it's like, hey, how you feeling, what's going on, but your mind at that time just really hadn't stopped from being in that survival mode. So it was those conversations. It was like, no, I'm good, I'm fine. What really hit me was afterwards, a few months, I really started setting in like, hey, like, I'm back to normal. It was such a change for me where it went from like a fast paced survival mode to absolutely nothing. Like, go back to work and everything's fine, get on a computer and do some PowerPoints. And I was just like, man, like, this is hard for me to adapt back to the normal lifestyle. And I think it's like that for not just the service members, but for family as well. My wife, my kids, was definitely in that atmosphere where it was hard to kind of adapt back. Although like all the emotions are high and rising, you're glad to be home. The wife loves to have you back. The kids are there for you, but it's just like that weird connection right off the bat where it's kind of like a hard bond to get back to that connection. And I found that going through some of the processes that I did, seeking help. It was hard for me as a leader to speak on my own behalf, like, hey, I'm struggling, especially going into some of the behavior health and stuff. Like, soldiers see you, the people that are working see you, and they're like, oh, this is a captain. This isn't used. We're not used to seeing like somebody with leadership. So it's kind of like, for me, it was kind of like, well, let's talk to you offline and let's get you help where everybody don't see. And that's what I didn't want. I wanted to stand out. I wanted to go against the grain. I wanted to be truthful on what I was going through. So maybe somebody else could benefit from it opposed to myself. So everything that I've done, all the processes that I had been through, I was 100% honest about it when I started struggling. And I think a lot of times with service members, that's what we steer away from, is because it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're struggling as soon as you get back. It could be 6 months, it could be a year, 2 years, 3 years. You never know, because everybody's situation and how they react to stuff is completely different. And I think we undermine that a lot throughout the service. It's like, oh, you haven't been on a deployment in 2 or 3 years, or you haven't seen something, like, just because you haven't seen it or you haven't been through it, or some of them wasn't traumatic or dramatic. Talking with soldiers, like, their time is still valuable that they spent over there. They've missed family, they've missed their wife, they've missed the birth of their kids, like, so there's all these situations that are going on outside of like the combat. And then you add the combat to it, and it just is a spiraling thing that it's hard to just be honest about. And I found myself in that situation coming back. It was hard for me to be like, well, what's the first step? Who do I talk to? Who's going to believe me? Where do I even start? So I know if I was having that problem as a leader, then soldiers are having that as well.
Oh, without a doubt. It's funny. I was fortunate enough to travel around to a few bases since we started this foundation, and I'm not going to name the bases and the leadership I spoke with, just to keep their anonymity is the correct word I'm looking for. I always hate saying that, but it's interesting. It's funny seeing a new crop of privates and even lieutenants coming into the military with no deployment patch. They're just starting to get all their schools and all that cool stuff, which is obviously cool to see for soldiers. But it's really interesting because it's not the military that we were used to,
right,
at all. And it's awesome. I mean, fortunate. They are fortunate enough to have leadership like yourself that has been there, that has deployed, that understands the hardships and the struggles, to be able to kind of use you as a glide path for them. Right. Hey, this is what you can expect if X, Y, and Z happens, so on and so forth. And I feel like that is extremely important. And I know we only probably have 10% of our generation, ballpark, left in the military, speaking with, sergeant majors and colonels now that I remember as, captains, majors, staff sergeants, so on and so forth. It's really interesting, but that's our generation. But before I get on to this next question, I will say that all of these, even full birds that I've spoken with, it is a breath of fresh air to speak to veterans and to the outside world, and to be able to speak freely for them. It's amazing to see that. Whereas 6.5 years ago, I was sitting in not the same seat, but, a similar seat in a different aspect as they were. But with that said, I kind of want to siphon into the largest concern that you see with our military community. Now, let me just say, that can be anything. It doesn't have to be with service members or, battle rhythm or anything. It could be any concern that you see. I know as the foundation, the concern that we see on the outside as veterans is obviously post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's suicidal ideations. You see that it's the most prevalent. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are becoming hooked on things like pills. They're very accessible for these veterans and these family members. But go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, obviously, I think that's probably number 1 and 2 is mental health, and then suicide awareness. So kind of on a lower scale, I think is a big issue, especially learning what I'm doing, is kind of like transitioning, being a leader in the military. I see it firsthand today, even during my PL time, like, once you make that concrete decision, like you're wanting to transition out, the leadership at that point, like, it has a different mindset. Like, oh, this soldier's getting out, let's just like kind of forget about it, and he's going to get out and do his own thing. For me as a leader, that was probably the saddest part. Like, once I let the company commander know, or the leadership know, like, hey, these soldiers are wanting out, they're getting out. It was a hard transition, and it was a fight to keep them in the loop, like to help them out, to resource for them. So like me as a PL, that's what I done. And I think that's why soldiers invested in me so much as a leader. It wasn't, I never did preach like, hey, you have to stay in the military. Like, this is your only career. This is the only way you're going to be successful. For me, it was the aspect of, I would never ask somebody to stay in if they didn't want to, because it's going to make it bad for the whole organization. As an Army and whole, like, you don't, and I'm sure you've seen it, people that are still in that don't want to be there, it just makes it miserable. Especially and Lord forbid if they have to go down range with you or whatever, you don't want that. So I took the opposite approach. When I found out that soldiers didn't want to stay in, it was like my due diligence of helping that soldier, like, hey, what do you want to do? What's your career path? How can you transition and do it successfully before they really announce like they wanted to get out? So that was my goal. And I think that's a downfall in the military is, especially as a leader, like whether you're a lieutenant, whether you're a captain, whether you're a major, I've seen it. Once people drop those packets and they verbally say you want to get out, it's like everybody else around them has that like persona on them, like, oh, he's getting out. Let's not use him. He's not as capable of doing what he's doing. He's on the back burner, and it's sad because like, just because somebody wants to transition out doesn't mean like the stuff that they've done and that sacrifice just goes out the window. Like these people are still have 5-10+ years and they've done deployments or they've sacrificed, they've missed a lot of stuff. So I think that is a downfall that we have to get better at as a whole, is just when people realize that like, hey, like this isn't for me, and it isn't for everybody. Like there's some people that can do 20 and 30 years and this is like they're completely dedicated and they enjoy it. But for the people that is transitioning out and it isn't like that career, it doesn't mean that they're any less of a leader or they're any less of a competent person. It's just that they're wanting to pursue a new path. And I think that is a downfall that we have. As soon as we find out that soldiers or leaders want to get out, it's a opinion like, oh, let's put them on the back burner and let's go on to the next person. Like it's gung ho. Like you have to be in the military. You have to be strong. You have to be physically fit. You have to have this mindset where it's always go, go, go. And some people are just like, you know what, this isn't for me. I don't want to do it no more. And that's perfectly fine. And I never push that on anybody. Like, hey, even the individuals that want to join the military, I get those questions a lot too. And then my response to that is just like, hey, be wholehearted about it. But for the soldiers that are in, if you're no longer wholehearted about it, if you feel like you're waking up each and every day and you dread what you're doing and it's more of a job opposed to something that you enjoy, then it's probably not fit for you, And I try to look at that as the aspect outside of my leadership role. Like, hey, like it's all right for these individuals not to stay in, but it's my job to help them transition out.
Without a doubt. So Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Program, is that still a thing?
It is, yes.
And I obviously you haven't went through it, but I'm sure you've had soldiers that have gone through it. Now, there was a study that came out in 2019 or 2020 about SFL TAP, and it kind of dug into the shortcomings of it. Now, I thought it was, actually a decent program when I went through it, but I don't want to give too much away because we're going to release a prosperity program that we're going to do to help transitioning service members and help veterans and Gold Star family members who already are out, but they need the glide path, they need the passion, they need to find it again. But with that said, I found it really interesting looking at this study and what they were talking about, because I feel like a lot of things that they are pumping into our service members, like the GI Bill, which, don't get me wrong, is absolutely phenomenal, but I will tell you firsthand, because I've experienced it, there's not much I've learned even going through an MBA program that you couldn't have learned on Khan University on YouTube or Googling or just getting from experience in the work world.
Right.
It's just a fact. It's how college is going. But we do hold that up on a pedestal like it's, the end of the world if we don't have it. And the other interesting thing is that I think it was 2014 or 15, a stat came out that said lower enlisted soldiers were the highest growing bachelor rate in the United States. Lower enlisted soldiers. So we have a service now that is the most educated in the world.
Right.
So that's obviously not the answer, not for everyone. But it's very interesting that you say that. And I like that you took that approach. I'd like to believe that I took the same approach. I don't know. I don't know if I did, but I do think that is number one, the correct approach is, the people who truly want to be there are going to be the most dedicated. And ultimately, the last thing in the world that you want to do is bring someone downrange who's dying to get out, but got coerced to stay in. And God forbid something happens to them or their family. Right.
Absolutely. And like you said, I just think from seeing it firsthand is once somebody is like, hey, I want to get out or whatever, it's kind of like dead end conversation with a lot of people, like, okay, this is the process, transition out, let me know how it goes. And there's not much oversight of it, like for me, for example, how I done it, I always ensured like I would have a follow-up conversation afterwards with the soldiers. And a lot of times I got the response from like the squad leaders or the platoon sergeant, like, hey sir, like typically like that's not something that you do, or typically that's just something that we let the soldiers do, and they'll figure it out. And I was just like, but why is that? Like it's not that, I mean, you gotta think like some of the soldiers that are in are just like experienced life, like they get out of high school and that they don't go to college, they come straight into the military. So like, and they, what I found out a lot is like they say they'll figure it out or they're doing it, but they really don't know because they're scared to ask those questions. You got to think like a squad leader or platoon sergeant had been in 6-10 years or whatever. Somebody that's been in 2 years doesn't want to ask somebody like, hey, how do I do this? On how do I transition? How do I set this up? So it was really shocking for my squad leaders and my platoon sergeant for me to take the time out to be like, hey, so and so, like, this is what I think would be the approach for you. Like whether they take my advice or not, at least I gave it to them and gave them that boundary. And I think it really set the squad leaders and platoon sergeants up like, hey, although like I know you guys have seen it done like this for years, this is a different approach. So like I think my squad leaders and platoon sergeant at that time really invested into their soldiers even more because they seen me do it. And not because they wasn't invested already. It's just that they weren't used to somebody taking the time out and just being on an understanding page like, hey, just because nobody has done this before doesn't mean nobody can. So I really think that that was beneficial. And I think if a lot more leaders were like that, it would show the NCOs like, hey, like it's all right to really, you're not, a lot of times what I got was like, oh, you're babysitting them, or we don't want to babysit them. And to a sense, I see that, like it is the NCO's job to manage that. But in a sense, like you got to get outside of that realm, like you're holding their hand or you're babysitting them, because you're really not. Like these are human beings that are about to transition.
They're people.
Out to the real world, like they're 18, 20 years old, and you're not babysitting them, you're setting them up for success. And if you fail to do that, then it's kind of on you as a leader and as an NCO that your soldiers are transitioning and they don't have a job afterwards. They don't have interviews lined up. They don't know how to go through those processes and procedures because they've never seen it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I want to say one thing before I respond. So all the years I was in the military, something that's imprinted in my brain is all those formations where people get DUIs and stuff like that. But the funny part about it is no one ever talks about personal responsibility.
Right.
It's amazing to me, and I cannot believe it. I can say it.
Yeah.
You can say silent, it's all good. But it's amazing to me that the Army still adopts this philosophy of you're calling in an entire company, an entire battalion for one person who made a stupid mistake and got a DUI. It affects no one else other than that one person.
Right.
It's really amazing to me. So that type of oversight, micromanagement has got to be mitigated within our ranks. I mean, it's just completely toxic, and stuff like that is what drove out so many people from my generation, at least. Exactly. Absolutely. Stuff like that. I remember the Army wanted a mass exodus. They truly did back in 2015-16. I got out right at the beginning of 2016, and they got it, but I don't think they got the one they anticipated. Right. Unfortunately, because of things like that. But you put in a good perspective, Ryan, with understanding that a lot of these soldiers that you are talking to, or a lot of your peers or seniors that want to talk, like, yeah, they've been through a good amount of combat. And if it hasn't been combat, it's been stressful situations downrange, being away from families. I think it just is going to take time until the military adopts a philosophy like that. But I do think it's going to happen, at least on a micro level. It needs to.
Right. No. Yeah, I completely agree. And don't get me wrong. I put my squad leaders and my platoon sergeant to work, and it was hard on some days, like, because they were used to kind of just doing whatever, and I was never that micromanaged leader when I was in those leadership positions, unless it was something like that transitioning out. I honestly, I expected as they should, they're NCOs, they're squad leaders, they've been in 6, whatever, many years, the platoon sergeants 10 years or whatever. And I expected them to lead from the front and know how to do stuff. And outside of that transitioning period, it was pretty much like I left that up to them to master, because they are the backbone, and I think a lot of leaders, like you said, like they want to micromanage, and those formations like you were talking about are definitely still in effect, like they could
It's
be,
absurd.
yeah, at the end of the day at 1700 or like 1800, getting called back and having to call 100 plus people back, 50 people, just to say like, hey, be safe on the weekend. I think like it has to go away. And I've seen it when I was in Hawaii. I was in a pretty good unit where the battalion commander didn't do final formations, but he really let the leaders lead, the company commanders, the lieutenants. And if somebody messed up, and it was like you in their office, it wasn't abroad where 200-300 people. And I think that's more of an approach where it's more beneficial, because you're one-on-one. And at that point, like I had a couple of soldiers where I had to go and meet the battalion commander because like of what you said. And I could tell the difference in that soldier, like when they made those mistakes, like, oh man, the sergeant major and the colonel is both like chewing me out, opposed to if you're in a formation of 400 or 200 people, you're just like, all right, we get it. We really don't care. But yeah, me as a leader, I didn't like to macromanage. I expected a lot out of my NCOs, especially the ones that had been there for a while. But I also had that balance where I did intervene when I felt necessary, when it was transparent for soldiers at a lower level, when I could see that the soldiers really didn't want to ask those hard questions or come to their NCOs. So I used my leadership and my rank at that point, like, hey, I am the platoon leader, but I can talk to you like one-on-one with the squad leaders, and it be not a hard question, like not a tough situation. Like, hey, I'm human just like you are. What can I do for you to help you transition that you don't know? And after I sat down with whoever squad leader that was, like I had 5 or 10 questions from that soldier. But when I was getting the report from the squad leaders, like, oh, yep, they said they were good to go. They're transitioning, they're in the process. But when I really invested, and I was just like, okay, so what was the process, and what do you have questions on? Like stepping down to that level, they had so many questions, and their squad leader was like, oh, well, they told me they were good to go. So I think not being a micromanaging leader, but really investing on those times where it's pertinent for those individuals that are transitioning.
Yeah, I don't think that's micromanaging at all. Definitely not, without question. It's funny, it's hit or miss too. I mean, there's obviously just so many more NCOs than there are officers. So you truly have to rely on them a lot more, because there's one platoon leader. There could be 10 NCOs in one platoon.
Right.
And you just hope that all 10 of them are, as tactically, physically, and mentally proficient as the next one,
Right.
And hopefully that's at a high level, as it should be. But, sometimes obviously it doesn't happen that way, which is unfortunate, but it's the world,
Right.
and the other thing is, I will say, before I get into what I was going to say, is that a lot of these NCOs are burned the F out.
Right.
They are.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is now, but when I remember it when I was in, like, some of these guys have been in for 20 years and they have 10 deployments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is brutal. I saw one of my buddies just post. He's an old Rangerback guy. I ran into him in the 10th Mountain when I came over from the 173rd, and he had so many deployments, so much combat experience, such a great dude. I believe he got out as a first sergeant. But he posted the other day, like, I can finally take a breath of fresh air. Like, I finally can experience my family and being with my kids, and, doing jobs that, don't require X, Y, and Z. And it's just really interesting. I kind of lost. Oh, you know what I was going to say? I didn't lose train of thought. I just remembered it. A lot of these NCOs and even platoon leaders at the time, and what you did, I commend you for. I've never seen that done by a PL, to be honest with you. But especially for the squad leaders and even platoon sergeant, a lot of them don't have the answers to soldiers transitioning, because they simply don't know. They don't know how to run a business. I'm not saying they don't know how, but they've never done it because they're active, unless they have some side gig going on. They've never ran brick and mortars. They don't know, different localities around the country and how to get mortgages or best rates, or really any of that, how to go back to school and get an MBA or a PhD or whatever they want to do, start a trade, use the GI Bill benefits, because I know you use TA when you're in. there's just so many different aspects. So many of us have experience, and that's what we're trying to bring to the table now. Is now we have a foundation amongst others that do things like this, but we finally have someone who's going to dissect SFL tap and whatever the Marines, the Air Force, and the Navy, and the Coast Guard, whatever everyone uses, the Space Force now, which is awesome. Whatever everyone uses, we can dissect it and we can take the pieces of the pie that are missing and we can help them because we've been there. We're business owners,
Right.
Yeah, the CEO of foundation, but I also run businesses. Like
Right.
this guy in the foundation runs businesses. He runs businesses. We have a whole board of there's just a wealth of knowledge that people need to hear that we didn't get. No one got it.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Like it's super beneficial because like what you're doing is amazing, and you hit it perfectly. Like you'll have an organization where there's numerous of people within it that knows how to point you in the right direction. And you are absolutely right. Like if it comes to squad leaders or platoon sergeants, they've been in the military 6-10 years, however long, and they just don't really know the answer. And half the time what I ran into is they just because they didn't know, like it's hard for that soldier to come to them and ask because like they really didn't know. So it's that hard wall to get over. Like, I don't know either, but let's figure it out together. They would just kind of go on the guidance of the soldier, like, nope, we're good. We know what we're doing. We'll figure it out. But now with an organization like you're running that, like you said, like you have somebody over here that can already point you in the right direction. Somebody that's already been through something, somebody that knows how to figure something out. So it's like a big networking system that you can just dissect, like you said, that is just giving individuals answers when they need them. And it just isn't a long drawn out process. Like you have people that's been through it. You have people that has transitioned. You have people that has seen combat. You have people that's done this, and this. So it's going to be such an easier flow and process to get those questions answered, opposed to 4 or 5 people not knowing because they've never transitioned out and they've never been through it. So it's hard to find those people when they transition out that's been through it, because nobody that are still in that they're asking the questions to has never done it themselves. So yeah, I think what you just now said is just amazing. Getting a full team together that already has been through a lot of situations, a lot of processes, that has the answers, that doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, that you can kind of really just point and direct people in that and steer them in that way that has a quick and fast and easy answer.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I don't want to see people continuously make the mistake of going to a 4-year liberal arts degree college and wasting their GI Bill on underwater basket weaving. It's something that's not going to translate. And there's about 5% of people actually working within their degree field in today's workforce.
Yeah.
Which is an astounding stat. And it was 10% when I got out, and it's dropped even more so after COVID. But, we're going to release that program. We're trying to release it by the beginning of September. So I don't want to give too much away about that, but there needs to be, we see it, everyone knows it now, and that's out. And even people that are, starting the transition process, there just needs to be someone, a foundation like us, or something other than headhunter companies that have a monopoly within the government system. And that's a conversation for another time, what they try to do to our officers and even some NCOs. But there needs to be a process. There needs to be something. We're taking a 3-pronged approach. We'll release it at the beginning of September. But I want to move on to everything about you, because we could talk for literally days on that specific topic. So what everyone is likely dying to know, and myself included, is what the future holds for Mr. Griffis and his family.
Yeah, man. So really for me, I feel like I have a new calling, just to speak, just to be a vessel. And I'm really trying to pursue that. I can't really put a time limit on it right now, but my future goal, whether it be next year, whether it be 5 years from now, I want to be transparent enough where I can really invest in the individuals and be a vessel for anybody that's struggling, that's going through troubles and trials, and just do that as a full-time career. The wife is doing the same thing. She is currently a nurse, but she's transitioning to her passion, which is singing. She's releasing a song this Friday, and I think it's just really a Kickstarter for us. Like we've done this military lifestyle now for 6 years, and we love it and we enjoy it, but we really want to do something that we're gaining right now, like a new passion for. And for me, that is just being able to help individuals that have maybe been through something that I have been through, certain situations, or honestly just be a voice for individuals that are in need that I can show up to, I can have conferences with, I can schedule meetings, do podcasts with, and I think it's something that is needed from a different aspect. And I would love to just be able to pursue it and really invest, because right now it is hard. I'll be honest, it is hard being active duty and posting videos. And like you said, 15 to 30 seconds, it is amazing. I love doing it. However, I really want to get in front of an audience, and it's hard for me to do that. Although there's stuff that I could have done in the past, but something has always came up. Like me and you have tried to schedule this for a few times, but being active duty, you just never know. A training might come up, a TDY, and it's hard really because it's like morning to almost night time. So I think getting a little bit of freedom in that aspect, I will really be able to open up more and really pursue the social media thing where I can be relevant to individuals that are really in need.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, hopefully whenever that day comes, we can help propel you and amplify your words and your voice, man, because it's definitely needed within our community. There's not a lot of people like yourself that have ever really stood out to me in particular within the military community, but you surely have, without question. And please give us a link or post it when the wife's song drops, man. We want to hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I really appreciate all your help as well. Like I go through your stuff, and it's amazing to see somebody as yourself that's running these organizations, running these businesses, that see something maybe in myself that throughout a 15 to 30 second clip that stands out. And that's probably the best compliment that I can get, is just seeing the videos and something that I said or something that I've done to help individuals that key them into wanting to see more, and as this process goes, and I do it, if I transition and do it full time, to bring awareness to everything that we're both doing. My goal is the first thing that I want to do, it's in the works right now, is to run across the state of Kentucky. It's about a 300-mile trail right now that we have mapped out, and hopefully do it within 30 days. And it's just strictly running, just to bring awareness, just to get the audience, the voices, the individuals. And I want to do it as a collaboration with individuals within the service and without. I have a few news media outlets right now that are on board with it, and kind of do it as in a group, as when I'm running through whichever county, whichever city, is have runners along there with me, just to bring awareness to everything that we're trying to push, because I think it is something cool. It would be a 30-day journey, 300 miles. And it's just something that honestly, I think would push myself as well to the limits, to where other people can do it themselves, that comes along and joins, whether it's 1 mile, 5 miles, 10 miles, or however. It's something that I really want to transition and do as I transition.
Yep, that's incredible. And like I said before, we got your back 1,000%. Would you be looking at doing 10 miles per day for 30 days, or
it would probably be 10 miles per day?
That's awesome. That's a smart approach too.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to wear yourself down. I remember running a marathon and I couldn't walk the next day.
Right. So I honestly, so for me, I've always kind of been a runner. I ran cross country. And although I could probably shorten it, I think for the environment, to still push it, to feel the pain, but to be along, to do the videos, to have people invested in it, to stop here and there, for whatever reason, I think a good 10 miles per day for 30 days would be right where I would want to do it at. Whether some days might be a little bit longer, but I think about a 10 mile per day type scenario would be ideal.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, is there anything you want to add on? Anything we didn't touch on?
I just really appreciate you taking the time. It is hard for me to set up stuff like this, to be open, to be vocal, but just knowing that I have your support throughout a lot of this, I appreciate everything that you're doing, everything that you're pushing. And I just want to be transparent with you and let you know that everything that you're pushing, I'm supportive 100%. And I'll do anything within my platforms and my power to help you do that as well.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that, man. We're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely looking forward to the future. We need people like you on our side and on our team, and all these other great foundations and businesses that are starting. But we greatly appreciate that, man. So everyone, this is Ryan Griffis. If you have not heard of Ryan before, please check him out at Mr. Griffis on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube. And his wife is releasing a song on Friday, so we're all in great anticipation of that. Ryan, we appreciate your time, man, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.